Growing up outside Niagara Falls, Canada, James Cameron developed a love for science and water as a young boy. After his family moved to California, Cameron studied physics at Fullerton Community College, where he switched subjects to English. Cameron worked odd jobs, including as a truck driver and a high school janitor, while he wrote in his free time. After seeing Star Wars, Cameron quit his job as a truck driver to enter the film industry. His career began as a filmmaker in 1978 when he raised money from dentists to write, direct, and produce Xenogenesis. Then in 1979, Cameron served as a production assistant for Rock and Roll High School. While educating himself on filmmaking technique, Cameron started a job as a miniature model maker at Roger Corman's studio. This led to Cameron to becoming an art director for Battle Beyond the Stars in 1980, then special effects for John Carpenter's Escape from New York in 81, and served as a production designer for Galaxy of Terror. While on that horror film, an Italian producer noticed his talent, offered him the chance to direct a sequel to Piranha titled Piranha 2: The Spawning in 1982. Inspired by John Carpenter's Halloween, in 1984, Cameron wrote and directed The Terminator. Like the unstoppable cyborg of that movie, Cameron has never looked back. James Cameron is a true visionary filmmaker who has revolutionized the motion picture industry time and time again. 3 of Cameron's films are amongst the top 4 highest grossing movies of all time. Recently, 3 film directors and 2 book authors sat down to share their unique perspectives on James Cameron.
My name is Brent Dunham. I'm currently the copy editor at Studio Binder, which is a filmmaking blog and YouTube channel, basically film education. We've done a few videos on James Cameron and how he's made some of his films. I also was the editor of a interview collection for the University Press of Mississippi, James Cameron interviews.
My name is Micah Gallo. I worked in a lot of different capacities on indie films, probably most notably in post-production, doing visual effects and mastering. Directed a film called Itsy Bitsy.
My name's Ian Nathan. I used to edit a film magazine called Empire. Still exists, but I've since left it. Biggest film magazine in Britain. You can hear my accent, I'm British, from London. I moved on from editing film magazine to write film books. I've written well over 16 books now, including James Cameron, a retrospective. You know, what I've been writing about. I wrote about Terminator about 10 years ago as well, did the Terminator Vault. Written about aliens, written about Ridley Scott. I've written about Quentin Tarantino and Wes Anderson. But at heart, I'm a film fan. I'm a film devotee. I still get the hair in the back of my neck going up when the lights go down in the cinema.
I'm the writer, director, producer of Devil's 5, Double Vision, which are both released all over the world in different platforms, Tubi, etc. I've also directed a movie back in the late 90s called Evil Streets, which is no longer available to the public. I have a YouTube channel show called Into the Depths with Terry R. Wickham, where I talk to filmmakers, rock stars, models, all kinds of cool people. My next movie I'm trying to get ready to make is called Terry R. Wickham's Anomaly, which is a very scary ghost story.
Might be a little obvious, but it's T2. The reason why, I guess I'll start with how I came to it, as a young, what would have been 10-year-old boy, watching this movie with my friend, and as soon as it came out on VHS, this is what we were watching, over and over. We internalized it. It became just kind of part of our fabric, just the intense action, the cool music, like the robots, it's everything a 10-year-old boy would have ever wanted in a movie. No longer being a 10-year-old boy, a grown man who can appreciate it for all kinds of other reasons, mostly from a filmmaking standpoint, from an action film standpoint. I think it hits on all those levels, on just a childhood nostalgia level, on just a cool movie level, like it doesn't get any cooler than that. You've got great characters, you've got great acting, you've got a heavy dose of heart and sympathy and fatherhood going on in this movie. So there's just so much to like, and to write it off as just another action movie is really dismissing it, underrepresenting it as a really staggering piece of work.
For my favorite James Cameron movie would be the theatrical cut of Alien. And I think it's a perfectly paced movie. The specific cue, I think it's called Bishop's Return or something. It has Bishop in the name. One of the best cues in action cinema of all time. But the way they placed it, which may have not been the way Horner intended it to be placed, is phenomenal. especially in the kind of final sequence back on the ship. One of the movies that in my life I've probably watched the most times. That's how I've come to rate it as one of my favorite, amongst other things. I mean, even reading the screenplay back when I was studying some screenplays, it's one of the best written screenplays that I've ever read. I don't know if Walter Hill had anything to do with that. Cleaner and tighter than maybe a lot of other Cameron screenplays, which isn't a knock on his writing. It's just there's something phenomenal about that one. It has a succinctness, kind of a poetry to it, even like I kind of remember the way he describes outer space in the beginning. And it's yet there's an economy of words. And so just a very well crafted movie on almost every level.
This is quite a hard question. I'm a kind of, I suppose with my age, I really err toward the kind of the early, what I call the tech noir films. Terminator, Aliens, The Abyss, Terminator 2. Though that quartet for me is Cameron at his best. You know, I enjoy a lot of his films. You know, I enjoy Titanic a lot. In that group, comes down to Terminator 2 and Aliens. That's not to dismiss the Terminator, which I do love a lot. And I think I'd go with Aliens ultimately. And there's so little in this that it's a very relative argument. I go with Aliens because the characters come to life, the power of what he does, the kind of escalation of it. That last hour of Aliens is nearly unbearable. It's so exciting. It's so heart-pounding. It's almost like abuse, which is, I mean, it's a great compliment. Just the construction of story and peril and tension, no digital effects in it at all, yet it still holds up. And I think it's just an object lesson for anyone who thinks they're making action genre cinema. I just say, look at Aliens. That's how you do it.
It's tough because he's one of my favorite directors that we discussed. I don't think he's ever made a bad film, but I would definitely put maybe the original Terminator right up there. I think that's probably my favorite just because it's down and dirty. It's before he had a huge budget where he could do anything he wanted. So I've always, and it's just for me, like, I mean, it's one of those movies where I got caught watching it by my parents when I wasn't supposed to. So it has a special place in my heart. You know, I think Aliens is probably a second favorite, but I would definitely put Terminator as number one.
Back in 1984, in the fall of 1984, I was in the Army. I went to go see a movie on a Saturday night when it first opened. It's the only movie in my entire life that I paid to see it on a Saturday. I paid to see it the next night on Sunday. I paid to see it the next night on Monday. I paid to see it the next night on Tuesday. 4 nights in a row. That's never happened with any other film or filmmaker, and that was The Terminator. For me, The Terminator, there's so many great qualities about that film, but if I was to nail it down to the most important aspect of it, it was that story that was a circle. You know, you had a guy in the future that sends a man back to the past to basically help his mother, and the guy that goes back to the past is the one that gives her the baby, which is the man that sends him back to the past. You know, so it's this full circle. You know, as good as the effects are by Stan Winston and Fantasy 2 and the music by Brad Fiedel and the cinematography by Adam Greenberg and, you know, the great acting with Michael Biehn and even Arnold Schwarzenegger and Linda Hamilton, it was really that story that just grabbed me. And I remember when I remember being in the theater. It was on an army base. I remember I was towards the back, and as soon as that music from Brad Fiedel came in with, you know, you heard that kind of deep, kind of machined percussion drums, and all of a sudden there's titles about the future with the war and everything. You start seeing these things fire. I was hooked. I mean, I was right in. For me, it's The Terminator. It has so many great qualities, and I think it's one of the best films ever made.
I'll say that his crowning achievement is the movie Titanic as an effort, as a project, as an endeavor. Even T2, when you think about it, when you look at it, it's a very simple, maybe construction. It's still action. It's still, you know, but it's just like a small group of characters, you know, driving in a car, shooting, you know, there's a lot going on. But just from the sheer scale of a production, Titanic is insane. Also because Cameron, pretty confident in saying this, that Cameron has a full grasp of the entire skill set of a filmmaker. You know, he can do anything, and he does it well. And he put everything in any filmmaking textbook into Titanic. Miniatures, bigatures, forced perspective, CGI, a practical set that can, you know, turn 90 degrees. Everything that you could do to make a movie, like every process, every technique is in there, and it all fits together. It all coalesces in this literally spectacular movie. So I don't think we'll ever see. There's no one in their right mind would ever try something like that again. So it kind of becomes this pinnacle of his career.
For me, I think his crowning achievement This was a tough one. I probably went back and forth in my mind between Titanic and The Abyss. For me, I probably think of his greatest achievement as The Abyss, just because of the difficulty making that type of movie. I mean, when I think about film achievement, what comes to mind for me is something like 2001: A Space Odyssey, where it changed cinematic language. And I think of The Abyss on the same level. Maybe not, it didn't change cinematic language in the same way, but the achievement of it. I don't know if anybody else has made anything as gutsy since. And I've read the stories about it, most notably from the book Titanic and the Making of James Cameron, which goes back into the Abyss time period and makes a lot of cross references between those two films and his style, and from the effects, shooting underwater, grueling nature of making that movie. I think it's a amazing achievement.
Oh, that's a good question. Can I cheat a little bit and answer with two films? One, I think, is Terminator 2, because Terminator 2 is basically, it's the creation of the future of the film industry. It's CGI. We've just been talking about how CGI isn't great, but Cameron still brought CGI to life and all it can do. I think I put it in the book. It's like what he does, and what he's never really recognised for, is the guy who puts the whole industry on his shoulders and sort of staggers into the future and takes it with him. Everyone else is back here going, what are we going to do? Should we make more of this? He's going, right, this is what we're going to do. And he completely redefines how you do it and what the toolbox is. And that happened narratively. It doesn't happen because he's he's so sure of himself or so bold or so arrogant, although he has those attributes. He's narratively driven. He wants to tell stories. The only way he could create this Mercury man, this metal man, this mold, is to do it with this nascent computer effects. And there's wonderful stories of him calling up Dennis Muren at ILM going, I want a character to be made from computers and it's got to do this. Dennis Muren going, sure boss, sure. Putting the phone down going, how the hell do we do that? And they literally had to figure it out over 9 months how they build this little man. But that is just a hugely important film in terms of Jurassic Park, all these films came subsequently. And the whole way, every level of the industry works today. But I also look at The Abyss as, The Abyss is insane. It's just insane because who would make a film that way? Who would make a film underwater? It's just so hard to do. And it just shows what, ambition, daring can be in terms of just being a filmmaker, and hardship. And I think it's a truth of Cameron's process that he has to make something that's really hard to do. He has to be in battle. He has to have all, even the laws of physics straining against him in order to fulfill what he needs to fulfill. I don't think he could make a film in a room with relationships and couples. I just don't think he would know how to function unless it was unbelievably difficult and he was reinventing the process as he went. And but The Abyss speaks to me of just a kind of borderline insanity, but an awe-inspiring adventure in filmmaking.
I mean, I think Titanic is always going to be his crowning achievement because it's just the way it affected movies at the time, and it just hit at the right time, and people still talk about it. And it's one of those things where, Avatar was very close in terms of box office, but it didn't leave quite a lasting impression as maybe Titanic. I mean, Titanic, they keep showing it, in 4K. They've had some 4K screenings recently, and I think it was one of those movies where everybody expected it to fail and it didn't. And so I'll probably lean towards Titanic. I just remember I was a senior in high school when it came out, and it took me forever to get into a showing of it because it kept selling out. I remember I went to the theater and I'm like, oh, I have to go see Amistad instead, which is a good movie, but I was just kind of disappointed. So it took me 3 weeks to get in to see it.
I think a lot of people would probably choose some of his more recent works, thinking that technology is the answer to being highest quality or technical achievement. But to me, that's kind of, I hate to say this, I don't mean to offend anyone, but it's kind of stupid. I mean, right? Because if you say that technology makes a movie great, why don't you look at the first Halloween versus the remake, or the first Nightmare on Elm Street versus the remake, or the first Friday the 13th? It has nothing to do with technology. Whatever the filmmaker has at that time and whatever story they tell, it's irrelevant what comes after. So for me, I consider this movie a perfect film. It's actually perfect. If you look at the acting, the writing, the special effects, music, and I think it's the best sequel ever made by any movie in the history of film. film. And I'm going to choose Aliens. Aliens, Ridley Scott set the bar really high with the first Alien in terms of production design, art, cinematography, music, even the alien. But I think Cameron, when he came along, he just took it to a different level. First of all, it wasn't just one alien. It was many of the drone aliens plus the alien queen, which just was like a magnificent piece of art on film. You're talking about that action where you've got all these sequences with the Marines and Ripley and the little girl. There's so many scenes in that movie that are iconic. The movie I actually went and saw twice in the first weekend. Cameron just is able to do that. He's one of the rare filmmakers that gets me in the theater, put my money down. I think it's a perfect film. I love Titanic, Avatar, that stuff, but for me, his technical highest achievement, it's Aliens.
And I have to say that despite the pretty loud consensus and not without merit complaints about Avatar's story being somewhat derivative or familiar, overly familiar or whatever, but just the interest what that movie provides or inspires, that is, again, like we're talking about, every time out he's doing something we've never seen before. Avatar is clearly no exception. Who isn't interested in being transported in such a way to this other place with these other creatures and to make it look so real? I mean, seeing Avatar in IMAX 3D in 2009 was incredible. Captivated everybody. It's my dad's favorite movie of all time, and he every time it comes up, he can't stop talking about that experience of being on Pandora. Without any hesitation, it's like, yep, I was there and I experienced that and I got to see what I saw and it looked so real and it was universal. And I think across the world, this thing was captivating people. So maybe it helps that the story is familiar, or you have such a simple story like that we can all, around the globe, we have some sort of relationship to a story like that.
I would probably go with the most interesting James Cameron movie being the original Terminator. There's something about where his mind was at that time and the kind of science fiction stories he had been reading, probably the way that he had been eagerly anticipating his, first big success, his first big break, in that he had worked on a lot of other people's movies. Some were successful, some less so, all served some part of his ambition, but this was the first one where everything kind of came together and was a story that he truly was passionate about. It wasn't a job for hire. Somehow that comes across. Obviously marketable, but it's also uniquely him, and I think all the DNA is there for everything that follows after that.
Interesting is a word I suppose you can use in multiple ways, and I think what I find interesting is probably True Lies, because it's sort of the film that sits outside the rest of the films. They are kind of even Titanic fits in with this kind of hubris of technology and vast undertakings, all those kind of things. Water, that could go from Piranha 2 right the way to The Way of Water. So that, but actually True Lies, although it's Arnold and it's full of action, is slightly different. It was brought to him by Arnold, so it wasn't originated by Cameron, although it very much became the Cameron undertaking. I just look at it, and it's kind of it's an odd creature, True Lies. It has wonderful sequences in it, but it has an odd tone, the kind of vaguely black comic tone of James Bond, but exaggerated into a kind of weird, sort of almost Disney-esque family fable. Yet, it looks a bit awkward these days in terms of its sexual politics. It's still this kind of broad action movie. I think it's at its funniest when things are blowing up. When it's actually an action movie, that's the gags that work. But if you look back on it and go, what were you trying to do with this, Cameron? I find it interesting. I don't quite get it. And I think that's why I find it interesting, because I get the other films. I've watched it probably about 4 or 5 times, thinking this will be the time where I get it. This will be the time when it totally makes sense to me. I'll go, yes, True Lies. I come away still feeling like I still don't quite get it. There are just scenes that don't sit with me as well as his other films. So I think that is interesting to me, because often, when you write about film, it's the ones you don't quite love that are often the most interesting to write about, because you're exploring your own doubts as well as what's going on in the film.
Well, I would probably say The Abyss, just because I think that's one of those rare films where the director's cut is, I think, superior to the theatrical cut. He has just a lot of interesting ideas going on in that movie. I feel like it's underrated. It has fantastic performances. He pushed the envelope with the CGI technology at the time. I think Dennis Muren was one of the ones who worked on the liquid creature you see in the film. Yeah, and so it's like, for me, like I've always found that movie to be more interesting than just a popcorn movie, which is True Lies, for instance. Is just a popcorn movie. It's a very good popcorn movie, but it's not like you're sitting there thinking about it afterwards. And then there's, especially the director's cut of The Abyss, there's environmental aspect to it with the aliens that I think maybe doesn't quite come in as clear with the theatrical cut. And I think that that's what makes it a little bit more interesting.
Well, there's a lot of ways I could go with this, and it was probably a harder decision. But for me, I think the most interesting is The Abyss, because I think The Abyss has so many great moments. I think the only thing that really falters is the very end, whether you're talking about that kind of reverse close encounters, instead of the way Spielberg did it, comes up from the ocean, looks not so great compared to the rest of the movie. I think it was actually probably a compromised ending in his own mind. There were a lot of scenes in that movie that are just incredible. And I actually feel it might be the most difficult shoot ever made on any film ever. You're taking a abandoned nuclear reactor and filling it with water so that you could have like 60 feet of depth, and then put actors and a crew with lights, create brand new helmets so you could see the actors, you could actually record their voices. He's directing underwater, and where a lot of the cast and crew would be down there for a couple hours, he was down there for like 12 hours straight, and he'd have to come up and decompress. I remember reading that he'd have to hang upside down and watch the dailies. At one time, his oxygen ran out and he could have died. I just look at that scene with, like the submarine that's down there not working, and those guys go into it, and then you've got the scenes where they're Ed Harris and Mary Louise Mastantonio trying to breathe water, and then they have to hold their breath and then drown and get brought back to life. And oh my God. And then the soldiers trying to defend what they think is a nuclear, someone's going to steal it, another country. Michael Biehn was incredible in that movie. I thought he should have almost got Academy Award for that. I just think The Abyss is the most interesting Jim Cameron. Not a perfect film. The ending's flawed, but 3/4 of it is just amazing.
I'm going to go with The Abyss just based on the process of making it, the level of effort that needed to go into this movie to make it the way they did, to create that authenticity, to film everything underwater, to build that giant set in that giant water tank, to get his cast and crew all dive certified, be directing underwater, his cast and crew, to creating microphones that worked inside their helmets, so you're capturing dialogue as they're acting, no ADR. It's pretty staggering. He did it. He pulled it off. He set out this goal for himself to do it that way. He's the only one who could have done that movie. He never takes the easy route, on any of these projects. Of course, there's stories that came out of that shoot kind of speak to a level of insanity where it was just on the edge of being actually crazy, actually dangerous, actually a big mistake. The rigor that everybody had to go through. Sure, it's the story. Again, there's problems with the story that people don't quite gravitate toward. Something that didn't click with themes or whatnot. And I can see that, it's probably it's easy to kind of write that movie off. But if you go back to 1989 and think about that movie being made the way it was made, it's just the same as any of these other projects. Groundbreaking, most expensive, most dangerous, most authentic, most real. People should go back and watch The Abyss because it's just as impressive.
It's kind of weird to talk about anything James Cameron is underrated because almost everything he's made is so insanely popular. I guess I would remark upon instead, something that's incredibly successful, but that I think people write off. I mean, I've heard a lot of my film friends with their snobbery of sorts tell me that Titanic's not a great movie. To me, it is. I mean, every time I watch it, I have a emotional experience watching it. If I focus on it, I can kind of marvel at the accomplishment of what he technically achieved. And I think, too, DiCaprio's performance was something that I remember at the time kind of got a lot of flack. I mean, he was incredibly popular. They had calendars and everything. And yet there was a lot of snide remarks about him not being the best actor and things like that, of that nature. Yeah, I think everything about the movie works. Sometimes even surprisingly so. I mean, the end sequence with where they go back to the ship and then everybody starts clapping, it makes this kind of emotional sense and it's really powerful. But I could see how somebody could write it off as silly, and yet I think it's loaded with a lot of really potent elements and it's incredibly well researched. So it's kind of, despite its popularity, it's humble about the deeper layers, but I think those deeper layers are there.
Yeah, and I would just add to that I think a lot of the hate towards the movie, I just think it's jealousy. I think people are jealous that it made so much money. It won awards. Maybe even the way he responded at the Academy Awards saying "King of the World."
It was very hard to come across underrated in James Cameron.
Of course.
As I kind of did my sort of calculus doing the book, I think he is. You can't put a price on like the Sistine Chapel. He is the most successful artist of all time. He's made the same amount of money as entire studios, his films. And people don't even sort of. I think he's so successful, people can't quite rationalize it. He outweighs Spielberg and Lucas and all those kind of guys. It's just an unprecedented. So underrated is quite hard to come by. But you have to come back to The Abyss, I think, because it's his only, with setting aside Piranha 2, which he only did 2 weeks on, it's his only box office failure. All the other films were massive hits. Some of them, billion-dollar hits. He's got, two of the biggest films of all time, two of the three biggest films of all time. And so you look at The Abyss and go, well, it's the one that didn't work at the box office. It didn't quite click. Yet it has some of his best filmmaking in it. Certainly the kind of midway sequences where things go wrong and they have to sort of react, just incredibly gripping, slightly in the Aliens style, done with this kind of underwater utility, this kind of feeling like you're submerged and you can't breathe as well. Just extraordinary. So I look at that and I think it's got one of his best performances in it from Mary Elizabeth Mastrantonio. I think she's just fabulous in that film. Something we don't often talk about in terms of Cameron is the quality of the performance. We almost take them for granted. I think you look at that film and it's an actor's film. Funnily enough, The Abyss, it really is about how good the performances are, and they're what makes it work.
I would say The Abyss, probably. I think it's one of those ones that people, because it wasn't a huge blockbuster, it still did well, but it came out around the time when they just kept releasing underwater movies. I remember specifically as a kid, I was like, this is another underwater movie, and it's the best one out of the ones that they released. But you had Deep Star 6, you had Leviathan, which is a personal favorite of mine. So I feel like because of that, it didn't get the attention it deserved. And so I feel like it's underrated in comparison to some of his other movies.
For some reason, the first one that would come to my mind is True Lies, because no one ever talks about that. And I think it's interesting because he didn't write it. It wasn't his story. Obviously, he wrote the script based on another movie, but that's kind of like the easy answer. So I didn't want to choose that. Instead, I actually feel this movie is underrated because I don't think people talk about it as much, especially maybe some kids that weren't born when it came out. But I think the second Terminator, T2 Judgment Day, I think that's really underrated. In fact, I think it's the best sequel that a director made the first and second film ever made. I think his Aliens is the best sequel ever made for a film that was not made by the first director. But T2 is it's a masterpiece. I mean, he took special effects, and not that that's that important to me, but he took it to another level, which kind of started on The Abyss with the moving tentacle, and then had the T1000 where he was Metal Terminator, he changed shape and all that stuff. But if you think about some of those action scenes, oh my God, through the sewer canals with the semi and Arnold on the bike with the kid, and then you've got the stuff with Linda Hamilton in the hospital, and then Arnold and the kid trying to get her out before the T1000 gets there, and then some of those scenes, I mean, oh my God. And at the end with the truck and the helicopters flying under the freeways at night, it's an unbelievable movie. Brad Fiedel, I thought he took his score even higher. It's like bigger with more orchestral. It was crazy. The movie was insane, and he did not disappoint anybody. So I think it's T2 Judgment Day. That's his most underrated film.
Just based on, I guess, the fact that it's the most unexpected performance in a James Cameron movie, but I'm gonna go with Jamie Lee Curtis in True Lies. I just think she is the unsung hero in that movie for so many reasons. I mean, Arnold's doing his thing. He's being a badass. He's got some funny one-liners. He's doing his thing. It's kind of par for the course for Arnold. It's fine. It's great. It's why we like him. It's everything. His reputation. It's all there. His skill set is all on display. And really bringing maybe with some exceptions, but like that was like really the moment when he brought his comedy chops, which he had been kind of working on, a little bit here and there with like Twins and stuff, and then his action stuff, and he brought those two things together. So for Arnold, it's a kind of a really important moment for him. Jamie Lee, she's got all kinds of stuff to do in this movie. She's got to be the suspicious wife. She's got to be the woman who's like exploring, kind of coming out of her shell and getting drawn into this, intrigue. She's got to do that sexy dance is that just that dance, there's so many layers going on there. She's trying to be sexy, she's nervous, she's scared. And all of that is coming out the more she gets drawn into all this stuff, and then the fact she discovers her husband has been living this double life. She's hanging outside from the bottom of a helicopter, and she's doing it in a way that could have been really shrill or campy or kind of annoying or like over the top. There's an element to that. There is a campiness to it, but she doesn't push it. It doesn't spill over into like, okay, well now it's not too broad. I think she found this balance between a kind of a real person, a real character who's dealing how a real person would deal with those situations, but also playing it up a little bit in certain moments. It's a big Hollywood movie, so she's a talented actress, and for sure. But yeah, it's such an unexpected James Cameron character. It's really fun to watch what we're used to seeing, I guess, from a James Cameron performance. But if we go back, he's handled female characters so well.
There's a lot of ways to go with it. I chose to go with Mary Elizabeth Mastrantonio. Hopefully I'm pronouncing the name right. Her performance in The Abyss is, to me, it's incredibly brave. I can just imagine how difficult it was for her. I can't assume, but I can imagine how difficult it was for her to be in that movie, in that environment, and trying to turn in that type of emotionally raw performance where she goes from being someone that's completely kind of closed off and full of blustery bravado to very emotionally vulnerable. And even, in a scene that just like haunts me. I mean, it's the scene of the movie is, and I'm sorry if I'm ruining this for people, is, when she's brought back to life by Ed Harris. And that is, there's a lot of great moments in the movie. That is the emotional climax of the movie, whether it was intended to be or not. And her, doing that bare-chested, getting beat on by Ed Harris, and just imagining how long they must have been shooting that for. I mean, just that alone is a stunning achievement. I'll never forget her performance in the movie. I think she's the character that personally that I relate to the most. Even though, don't get me wrong, Ed Harris is in a lot of ways the center of the movie. There's a lot of great acting and characters in that film, but there's something about her performance that is, that kind of like, it leaves a taste in your mouth of other things that you would have liked to see her do, because she did other good movies, but man, there's something about her in this one that is unforgettable.
I think I've got a simple answer to this. It's one of the, I think it's Arnold Schwarzenegger in Terminator 2, because I think the idea of Terminator 2, in typical Cameron fashion, was radical. It was absolutely radical. You think what the Terminator is, and when it comes to do a sequel, and Alien sort of fulfills the roles of sequel. It takes the original idea and expands and multiplies and does it really, really well. But Terminator 2 inverts the original idea, and you're almost daring to shake up and blow it out of the water. You're daring to risk your own premise, where you're turning the bad guy that everybody loved, who made the first film a sensation, into the good guy. Yet he's still a machine. That's an absurd idea, and an idea incredibly ahead of its time as well. But maybe say, in its current age. Absolutely, what you get is a film that depends entirely on two things. It depends on Arnold Schwarzenegger, it depends on the boy, and it depends on their relationship clicking. Of course, Linda Hamilton is fantastic, but her role is a bit more prescribed. It's a bit more, she's not. I think she always made the joke, she's the Terminator and Arnold is the mother. They kind of swap roles. Everybody's inverted in that film. But I think that film, it only works, in terms of a narrative and an adventure story and an emotional experience because of Arnold Schwarzenegger's performance. Really funny. He less relies on just bashing doors down. He comes in and he makes scenes work. He does his lovely kind of commentary as the film goes along on the folly of mankind, kind of wise man of the story, going, it's in your nature to destroy yourself. So he carries the themes of the piece. Yet he has this incredible emotional sort of relationship with this machine, and it's based on, one boy and his dog style things and one of the things. But Cameron said to William Wisher, his co-writer, he says, we've got to make people cry for a Terminator. That's what we've got to do in this film. And that was a joke when they set out, how does that, walking killing machine, why are we going to cry for it? That's what we do. By the end of that film, as he needs to be destroyed, and then Furlong is selling the scene as well. A powerful moment. Schwarzenegger melt,
when he's going down with the thumb, right?
Devastating. the whole house crying, you know. And you think Schwarzenegger, again, never given credit really, and a lot of his films are along the same lines, the same tone. I think he absolutely makes Terminator 2 work as an idea.
That is tough. You know, the Avatar movies, which I love as well, aren't necessarily about performance as much as it is about the visuals. I would probably have to lean towards Ed Harris in The Abyss, just because he's he just goes for it in that movie, and there's just amazing performances. And, you know, so I'm going to say Ed Harris in The Abyss. Like, I mean, Michael Biehn in The Abyss might be close. That is a fantastic villain character in that movie, but I'm definitely probably going to have to say Ed Harris.
Awesome. And by the way, I'm with you on Michael Biehn. I thought he should almost get an Academy Award. He was so intense.
Yeah,
with that pressure.
That's one of the craziest villain performances of any movie. And yeah, it sticks with you. I guess think about performances. Those are the ones that jump out of all of his movies, because his movies are very technically beautiful. And so sometimes the performances aren't, while Titanic is filled with good performances, you know, it's more of an ensemble. And even The Abyss is an ensemble, but Ed Harris really just kind of jumps out.
Wow. There's a lot of good ones. Sigourney Weaver being nominated for Ripley and Aliens. Oh my God. You know, Titanic, some people might say either one of the leads. You know, you could say it in Avatar, some of those actors, Sigourney Weaver, Sam Worthington, Zoe Saldana. You know, there's so many good actors. For me, it goes back to the Terminator. And I think that Michael Biehn was just amazing, because he had to match up against Arnold's physique and power as that one of the most iconic villains of all time. And Linda Hamilton's kind of playing this meek, mild, you know, Sarah Connor, and then she switches to a hardened woman at the end. But I think Michael Biehn, when you think about that scene after he gets her from Tech Nor and takes her into that garage and is basically trying to convince her that this thing is coming after her to kill her, which she doesn't believe. She bites his hand and she's like trying to get out of the car. And if you watch the way he's so intense with the veins coming out of his neck, his forehead, and the stuff, he's such a ferocious performance. I actually really admired him as a guy. Like, if you look at his physique then, I wanted to kind of be like Michael Biehn when I saw that movie. I just think that he was my favorite performance in any James Cameron film.
I'm going to go with the one shot in particular inside the nuclear explosion in T2. The big wide shot where you see downtown and then the blast expanding outward coming towards the camera. Kind of hill with a house kind of in the corner, that little miniature there. As I mentioned before, you know, on our YouTube channel, we done a couple James Cameron focused, you know, making of videos. So in researching that one, the techniques that are being used, the scope, that to take all the shots in that sequence are basically miniatures, right? The way they're used, the music, the sound effects, you know, everything going on top of that, maybe a little dated now that we have CGI. But if you think back to '91, watching T2, that was incredible. You know, that was the top. There's just something really visceral about that sequence. But that shot in particular, I just think kind of encapsulates James Cameron.
Yeah, I thought about this one a lot, and like you say, I mean, there's so many shots you could choose. A lot of his stuff, like I said about Titanic, it's sort of on the surface, it's simple, yet somehow becomes iconic. Like, it's that simplicity that translates into something more powerful than itself. But the shot that I chose is the shot in True Lies where Arnold Schwarzenegger is hanging his hand down from the helicopter and Jamie Lee Curtis is holding it, but it's sort of almost his POV looking down at her, at the carnage and the various things below. And it's a shot that when I think about it, like I say, it kind of belies the simplicity of it, because it somehow encapsulates something about the movie where you know, there's a sense of danger and excitement and their bond and connection in that re-enlivens their entire being and relationship with each other, that's giving her something in her life that was missing with her kind of humdrum existence. And now they're connected and she feels safe, and he has the ability to keep her safe and she can rely on that. And it's somehow also just a fun shot, and it's also something that I don't think you can show clips from True Lies and not have that shot. I don't know if you could show like a clip recap of Jamie Lee Curtis's career and not have that shot. Even with James Cameron, I wonder if you were to really go through and make a bunch of clips from his movies, I wonder if you could avoid having that shot, or what other shots you would pick from True Lies.
This is hard. And again, it's something I think he doesn't get the credit for he deserves, Cameron, the look of his films. We think of them in terms of propulsion and and energy and tension, and of course all that's true. But actually, there are some just stunning cinematography, and this use of blues and reds and sort of mauves. The tech noir palette is a joy to behold in places, and that there are terrific shots in Aliens that are sort of in passing almost. There's a great scene. So I'm cheating again by giving you a couple of multiple answers, but there's a scene where Burke's tried to turn the tables and release the face huggers, and Hicks is going to go, right, let's just waste him. Let's just got him tied to the chair, and they go, let's just waste him. And the lights go. You're about to this terrible scene where Hicks, heroic character, is going to do a bad thing and kill someone, and the lights go, and Cameron turns it red. The whole screen goes red, and it's just a fabulous bit of editing, and it's a fabulous bit of cinematography. Your stomach drops because you know what it means. It's just almost like a psychic again. It's like it misses out your brain and goes straight to your senses, and it's powerful. But there's just incredible shots in the abyss. There's a shot, I think it's of Elizabeth Strantoni on the edge of the abyss, and the lights rise up. It's silhouetted, and it's in water. And blue is it's a dream of a shot. It's something, I think, where he's moving the language of film into a sort of dream texture, which he should do. If you're a great cinematographer, you're trying to push reality into a kind of another dimension. And that to me is just what a great eye he had. And he's not given that credit for those things.
Man, that's crazy. It's pretty close to the shot in Terminator 2 when the semi comes over the bridge, through the cement. I always think of that shot. I mean, there's several shots in Terminator that I always think to. That one in Terminator 2 is very, or the shot in Terminator 2 where the T-1000 shows up in the helicopter and the guy turns to him and his face is all silver and he says, "Get out." I love that part. I love that. So it really, I mean, honestly, that is really difficult to choose. But I would probably just say those are the first ones that popped in. I don't want to say Titanic, where he's off on the, because everybody, it's almost so famous that I don't know.
You're talking about one of the greatest directors of all time, right? Some of the most iconic imagery in the history of film. Yeah, that's a tough one, but when I really thought about it, it actually came down to be pretty easy for me. I think the fifth shot in Terminator 2 Judgment Day, after you see the freeway with all the cars and then the girl and boy on the swing, and then exposes the white, then you see this like cars all at night destroyed. The fifth shot is that long Steadicam shot where he starts passing by swing sets that are burned up and tricycles. You start seeing skulls and remains of all kinds of destruction, and you come up onto this skull, and all of a sudden this endoskeleton's foot, one of the Terminator's foot, just crashes on it. You have this great sound effect. Move up and you see the endoskeleton. He kind of turns in profile and all these guns are shooting, and he turns to kind of see the red eyes. That shot is just so amazing because not only is it beautiful with movement and composition, but it's kind of telling the whole story of what this is about. This future war where the Earth is going to be destroyed by these machines and how you're going to have to stop them. And I just think that shot, if you were to boil it down in one shot, is my favorite shot in any Cameron film.
Ooh. Part of me doesn't want to just go with the obvious. I want to kind of argue for something maybe a little bit out of the box. Two for me, and I'll just say one and then really talk about the other. One is in Aliens. They're in the room. They're getting surrounded. They're coming through the walls. They've got the monitor. It's showing it's all red, and then they have to blast their way out of there, and then they're getting kind of chased for a bit. It's not really a flashy. No pun intended. It's not really a flashy sequence in a lot of ways, but I just remember watching that for the first time, feeling the level of kind of dread for them, the panic, the chaos of the strobing flash from the bullets. So you're not seeing everything. You're seeing fragments as if you were in that room trying to shoot these aliens dropping out of the ceiling, like a really visceral, like I'm there in a moment like that. It really checked all the boxes for me. I'll say that in the Way of the Water, that there's a sequence where they've captured Sully's children. They're kind of being held on that vessel, and then they've got these other sentry vessels out. Both you've got the crab suit swimming through chasing people. You've got Sully and his tribe, riding these flying fish dragon things. shooting guns. You've got that giant Tulkun, whale thing coming up and crashing on this boat. It's like the complete opposite of the Aliens thing. You can see everything. It's broad daylight. It's much grander in scale. You've got all these moving pieces to put together. You've got the spectacle of these big wide shots. This giant whale comes up, but then you've got all this cool military stuff on, and all these cool weapons, and the crab ship suits. You also don't see action on water like that. Again, going back to like scratching that itch of what is cool, he just really excels at it, at making something new that you've never seen before. He's really good at action geography, where everybody is, how they're moving, keeping track of everything. Like, okay, now these people are over here and this person's over here, and everything is making sense. That you don't just get lost. It's not just a big mishmash of chaos.
Yeah, wow, tough one. What I went with was Terminator 2, and what I went with in Terminator 2, the scene where the SWAT truck is being chased by the helicopter. That shot in particular where the helicopter flies under the bridge or the
overpass.
Yeah, that's like the kind of thing where and hearing a little bit about it, that stuntman was, as I recall, part of a team of brothers, and they had done a lot of stuff. And this was one of those shots where they kept pushing, and they kept pushing it more and more and more until they got that shot. I mean, it's just crazy to think about that they shot that. Like, it wasn't CG or created in a computer. There wasn't any weird wires or anything tricky about it. Like, they just flew the helicopter under that. And that was that. And the kind of thing that doesn't happen anymore. And it made me feel like, I remember hearing Friedkin talk about the French Connection and some of the crazy things they did on the French Connection. And he talked about how the mentality was out today, as he put it, you wouldn't want a squirrel to sprain their ankle, and all the talks about how much money the movie made. And he said back then, the talk wasn't about that. The talk was about whose films would last, Godard or Truffaut. People wanted to make something that mattered. People were willing to go to the limit to be a part of a movie and be a part of something exciting or a part of film history, something that really to them lasted. And that was, I think the mentality of people that worked with James Cameron around the time, through all of his career, but certainly up through Terminator 2, he was still making that kind of a mark. He was making those kinds of films, and I think the people that worked with him had to meet that level and or wanted to meet that level, and knew that he was the type of person that was going to get them there, and that they had a chance to really make something. And so, that is such a risky, crazy shot. So dangerous. I mean, so unbelievably dangerous, and yet it's just mind-blowing to see it. It's incredible.
I would agree with you, and I think that it's something that we don't see, like you said, anymore today. And it's something I think that's missing in films. That artificiality is very easily detectable. As good as it is, I think you can't con the audience. I mean, at some point we know it's fake. And I think there's a disconnect. I think when you're seeing something real, whether it be John Carpenter's The Thing with puppets and stuff being real versus all this animation, I just think the reality to me as a viewer, as a filmmaker, I want to see that over something that's fake.
It's really hard because this is we're talking about the fundamental language of James Cameron's cinema, and his films have just relentless in their the quality of their action and the power of the delivery of action, but always, as we're saying about story, what he doesn't do is action for action's sake. And I'm going to hone in on Aliens because it's my favorite, and you watch Aliens, and actually if you look at it, there's not actually a lot of action in it. You think there is, but there isn't really. There isn't sort of True Lies, and there isn't Titanic, the second half of Titanic, and obviously the avatars, there is a lot, and all those things. The scene where they're in the nest, everything's going wrong, and Gorman is just losing it, he just can't handle it. And it's an incredibly important point in the film narratively, because it's when Ripley takes charge, when Ripley sort of gets over her fears, gets over her kind of, stress, and she does what Ripley does. She takes charge. Gorman, get them out of there. They're dying. You can see all the flat lines on the screens. Orchestration is just astonishing. And she takes control of the APC. She starts going towards the nest. and crashes it into the nest. And the remaining Marines, led by Hicks, are getting out. Find the death of Drake with the acid across his face. Just that whole sequence, the use of music, James Horner's kind of drums, just martial stuff, brilliant. It's just fabulous. It's a piece of action, maybe not as spectacular as the boat tipping up and all those kind of other things you can think of, and I'm sure other people will cite. But it's an absolute fabulous kind of combination of moving the narrative on. The Marines, the Marines have lost, basically. It shifts genre. It shifts the movie from war film into disaster movie, survival film. And it shows you action, thrilling action, and desperation, incredible peril. It's a character beat. It says Ripley, and the whole audience going to go Ripley, and we wake up and realize what the film's about. It's fundamentally about Ripley, saving the day, and I just love that moment, and it always gets to me every time I can watch it, and on YouTube or separate from the film, and it gets me. And every time I watch Aliens, it gets me, and it's just he's a young man still, he's making his second full feature film, just blindingly good filmmaking.
That is a tough question. I mean, I'm probably going to go back to Terminator 2, the truck chase at night. That chase is fantastic. I mean, really, you can pull any Terminator 2 action sequence. And it's funny because Terminator 2 isn't my favorite James Cameron movie. And I don't know if it's because I felt like, I think it's a great movie. I think it's one of the best sequels ever made. But I always think the first one, because it was so gritty and he had to work with a way smaller budget. Like, I think the first Terminator has his catering budget now at this point, so like he had to really do some cool stop motion stuff with that movie and really be clever. But I mean, you could pick anything out of Terminator 2. Really, I've kind of been like ignoring True Lies, which isn't fair because I saw that movie like 4 times in the theater, and I remember thinking that the whole sequence with the jet at the end with the villain hanging off of it and stuff was just incredible. At the time, that was just like mind blowing. It feels like there was a lot more practical effects mixed in with CGI at that point, as opposed to Avatar, which is primarily CGI.
Do you know how difficult that is? You're talking about the master of action. I mean, it's insane. Think about Titanic, where he's actually showing a huge liner go underwater. Aliens, any number one of those scenes, with the aliens coming through the ceiling and the Marines going down into the sub-reactor, and they start attacking the crew and the Queen and Ripley with the power loader fighting the Queen at the end. And Avatar, oh my God, so many scenes, even the new Avatar, there's so many crazy scenes. And the thing about James Cameron, I got to say this with action, unlike a director like Michael Bay, the way he shoots action, you can't tell what the hell is going on. He doesn't lay it out. A lot of directors don't know how to show you what's happening. And Jim Cameron is a master of doing that. If I was to name one, it's got to go back to the Terminator. And I feel that this action scene could not be done better by anyone that's ever made film. And that's the Tech North scene. You're talking about, just if you look at the layout of that scene, and I watched it like 5 times today again, just before this, to really refresh it, even though I know it like the back of my hand. The way he plays that out, she goes in there to be safe. She calls the police. They tell her to stay in a public place. You're going to be safe. Everything's cool there. So the audience is kind of relaxing as well. And then all of a sudden you see this guy, big cyborg, come in. He's a bad guy. He comes in, and the way he comes in and doesn't pay for it, that guy grabs him, breaks his hand, walks. And then the way Cameron just, she knocks something over and bends down just as Arnold's walking past. Same time, Kyle Reese is over there watching her. When she leans up, she sees him. Now she thinks he's the guy that's coming after her. And then all of a sudden it's going in slow motion, and that song, Burning in the Third Degree by Triangles, is singing. And as that's kind of fading out, scores coming up, and then you hear the guns being cocked as Arnold got the shooter, and then you see the laser on her, and point of view of the red. Oh my God. And then all of a sudden all that shotgun go off. It's a perfect action scene. And I love it. I think it's a masterclass in directing. And as good as he's done other action scenes, to me, that's it. That's the top.
Yeah, he actually used it in his masterclass.
I can totally understand why. I want to just say I really appreciate you coming on tonight. I read your book, obviously, with the interviews. I thought it was great putting that together. I enjoyed that tremendously. So thank you so much, Brett, for coming on, being part of this, giving us your wisdom on James Cameron.
My pleasure. It was a great conversation. Anytime we want to talk about James Cameron, I'm there.
Okay, cool. All right, have a good night.
Thanks.
So thank you so much for tonight. It's been great.
Cool.
Thank you, Micah.
Thanks, Terry.
All I can say is that I've totally enjoyed our conversation. So Ian, you've been amazing. I'm so honored that you were part of this roundtable. I can't wait to read more of your books.
Thank you. It's been an absolute pleasure. Very enjoyable. Thank you.
Okay, great. All right, take care for now. All I can say is I appreciate all your wisdom and your thoughts on his work. I admire your work, as you know. I hope other people are going to search out these films now because maybe some of the things we mentioned they may not be aware of.
Fantastic.
He's one of my favorite 3 directors. Very important to me. I think if you look at my movies, even though they don't have any kind of a budget that he has, I haven't worked on that scale that Cameron works on, but I see his influence. It may not be a shot, it may not be a story, but if you look and really carefully watch, especially my most recent film, Double Vision, there's a propulsion that I kind of pick up from him. I'm not trying to imitate him. It's just coming naturally because I've been following him closely since 1984 when I watched that movie 4 nights in a row.